Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We're back with another Big Ten team preview here. We've got the Indiana Hoosiers. Before we do dive in, if you have been enjoying our off-season content, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate everyone's support. But taking a look here at Indiana, we've got the first year of the Darian DeVries era, bringing his son along with him, coming over from West Virginia. Starting on the offensive side of the ball here first, Cody. What strengths do you see in this offensive attack?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty obvious strength of this team, and it's the perimeter offense, and I think it's particularly the off-ball shooting. But I mean, I think there are players on this roster, particularly Wilkerson and DeVries, that are more than just off-ball shooters or even movement shooters. I think they can create offense or they can be like the main initiators for this offense in general. I mean, they're elite level shooters. Obviously, Wilkerson shot at 44.5% from three on 7.7 attempts per game at Sam Houston last year, and obviously DeVries had his season cut short due to that shoulder injury, but he shot at 47.3% on 7 attempts per game in his limited sample size. Like his shooting was like watching him last year. It was even more ridiculous than I remember seeing it at Drake. And it was just, I mean, he got a little bit more perimeter reliant from leaving Drake to going to West Virginia, but he proved that he belongs in the power conference ranks, and he's going to be one of the best shooters in the entire country. And then you add in some bench shooting options in Nick Dorn, Josiah Miles, and then the four-star freshman Trent Sisley, I think, is going to be especially great at the four position. When the front court's obviously an issue that we'll talk about in a few minutes, but I think Sisley is a guy that's going to provide some really good spacing at the four position. DeVries' offenses typically go as his shooting goes, and he just has plenty of it this season. His last four offenses at Drake finished inside the top 100 in adjusted efficiency. So, I mean, it's a pretty impressive feat for a mid-major coach. It kind of just shows that he knows how to either construct a roster or he knows how to just coach on the side of the ball. And like I mentioned, I think some of these perimeter options are more than just shooters. I think particularly a guy like Tatum Connerway. He's not a fantastic shooter in his own right, but I think he's going to be manning the point guard duties for this team. And, while the scoring efficiency is in question, I think Connerway he's a fantastic passer who can find shooters, and he can find his role man in all kinds of ways. He's just a very high level passer, had a 36.7% assist rate last season. And when Connerway plays off the ball or goes to the bench, I think Tucker DeVries is going to be operating as the point guard or point forward or whatever you want to call him. And when he's at full strength, I think he's capable of being a high level pick and roll operator as a passer or a scorer. I mean, we saw in his years at Drake, he's done it against really good defenses in the past. I think it's just a matter of him showing that consistently at the power conference level. And yeah, like I mentioned, he's more than just a 3-point specialist that he kind of showed last season. And then, Wilkerson, he can put the ball on the bounce. He's more of a scoring minded guy, but he can score it really at all three levels. So I think the rim offense is going to be in question a little bit, but I think he has, the size and the build to be able to score there. And he's really good off the bounce from three, too. He shot at 42.6% on off the dribble threes. So I think he's going to be a really good secondary creator who can really not man point guard duties, but he can take on like a large part of the on ball responsibility if both of those guys and DeVries and Connerway go to the bench. So this is going to be a really, really good perimeter offense. And then just one final note is, I think if all else fails, like they can use Reed Bailey as like a point forward, and he could be like a trigger man and dribble handoff. He can be like a post hub a little bit. Not the most efficient post scorer out there, but I do think his skill set is going to fit when playing around a lot of shooting.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Obviously, the shooting is going to be a massive strength for this team, particularly DeVries and Wilkerson. And then you mentioned Reed Bailey at the end there. I think Reed Bailey is a really kind of intriguing piece because he's not your typical like 6'11" big man. He can really kind of do a lot of different things. He's got a bit more burst off the bounce. You watch him, go into screens and slip those screens. Like he just moves quicker than most other bigs are going to be moving in this league. Obviously, he's a bit more of a thin-framed guy, so I do have some concerns, with his ability to kind of be efficient on the interior in the Big Ten in particular. But he's especially skilled, and I think is a very intriguing prospect to be around. All this shooting, which kind of leads me into my weaknesses. I think the bulk of my weaknesses on this offensive end really lie on the interior. I guess we'll start here, right, with this team is not going to be on the offensive glass really at all. Darian DeVries teams traditionally, the last 3 years in particular, his last 2 years at Drake, 319th, 314th in offensive rebound rate. Last year at West Virginia, 299th in offensive rebound rate. Just looking at the personnel, right? I mean, Reed Bailey, 5% offensive rebound rate. You've got like Sam Alexis, who, has his fair share of issues. He's kind of there just based on numbers. He looks like their best offensive rebounder, career 13% offensive rebound rate. Last year at Florida, 14.5%. But I don't really know like what role he's going to play because he's limited in a lot of other areas. I think he kind of throws a wrench in their floor spacing if he's going to play. It's just not really a point of emphasis, right, for Darian DeVries to get on the offensive glass. So, and then, the front court depth, I think, is really a problem on this end of the floor. Their post-up offense, like I mentioned, I have some concerns with Reed Bailey as a post-up hub in terms of a scorer. I think he has some upside potentially as more of a creator out of a post-up. But in the Big Ten, where he's a bit more of a thin-framed guy, I have concerns about some of these more physical Big Ten teams kind of, getting after him. I don't think he's going to be able to just like post up and score, down on the block. And then behind him, it's really like Sam Alexis and that's it. I think this team in general, with that being said, could become a little bit too like perimeter oriented in general. They have shooters everywhere. I think that's a bit of a concern, right? Especially as a team that doesn't get on the offensive glass. If they're fully relying on making shots, that could create some issues for their offense if they're not a team that's going to be able to get on the offensive glass.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's just the interior offense in general. I think outside of Connerway, there's not really a guy that strikes fear in a defense as a driver. Like I like DeVries and Wilkerson as on-ball creators. It's going to be a lot more outside the arc and in the mid-range. It's not really going to come at the rim. I just think there's limited burst with those guys, limited athleticism as a whole. Like Conway is going to be manning a lot of those duties, and I'm not overly excited about him on the offensive end in general. You mentioned Alexis, he's really the only great offensive rebounder in the projected rotation. Like you have a guy like Josh Harris down the board as well who can get on the glass for you, but overall, it's not going to be a point of emphasis anyway, and not a guy that you're going to give the ball to on the low block. But I do think Sam Alexis is going to have to play a lot on this team, whether that's good or bad. I guess that remains to be seen. But yeah, I would agree. That was my only real concern is, it's not a team that's going to get to the free throw line either, just because of the lack of rim rate.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Now shifting gears to the defensive side of the ball. I know in our offseason content, you were, giving some pretty high praise to Tatum Connerway and his ability on the defensive end back when we were doing transfer portal reviews. So of course, 5.5% steal rate for him. What strengths do you see, alongside him in this defensive unit for Indiana?
Yeah, can I just say Tatum Connerway is the strength of this defense? He's a pretty ridiculous defender that's going to take away the main perimeter option on almost every single team. He's just a ridiculous ball hawk. You mentioned a 5.5% steal rate for him at Troy, which is third in the country. And he was 27th nationally in defensive box plus minus as a guard with a 4.4. I think that was 12th or 13th among guards nationally. So clearly he's just a ridiculous defender with length at what? He's 6'3", probably plays more like he's 6'6" or 6'7" with a point guard's quickness. So he's very impressive. And just, I guess, as a team, I would say their transition defense is going to be strong, or at least their transition denial. I don't really love the athletes across the board, so I'm not sure like if the efficiency when guarding in transition is going to be all that great. But the fact that they're going to be able to take it away, I think is going to be key, and it's going to give them a semi-high floor. And I think there's some wing depth as well, but nothing really moves the needle for me. Like, I'm not overly excited about some of these guys down the board, like Nick Dorn and Josiah Miles are at least extra bodies that can guard multiple positions. And like DeVries, Wilkerson can do that as well. It's just not going to be all that high level, but I think if they have enough bodies there, I think they could be at least competent.
Yeah, I would agree. I think your point about the transition denial kind of has to be true, right? If they're not going to get on the offensive glass, then they have to be at least solid in transition. It needs to be a point of emphasis. Like you mentioned, the athletes could be a problem, but I think like they have to put emphasis there. Especially as a team that's probably going to be a bit perimeter reliant. Longer shots, longer rebounds, more runouts. They need to be prepared, to stop transition offense coming the other way against teams especially teams that are more athletic than them. Looking at weaknesses on this side of the ball, I think, for me, it falls again in the front court. You've got Reed Bailey up front, not a really great defender at all. He's not a prolific rim protector, and he obviously profiles to be their starting big man. 2.7% block rate last year, career 1.6% block rate. Rim protection just is not a strength of this team. You've got Sam Alexis, who, has his weaknesses, but he's got a career 7.1% block rate. So, maybe they need to play him a bit more just for defensive purposes, but it really hinders them on the offensive end, I think, outside of his upside as an offensive rebounder. But like we said, if that's not a point of emphasis, then it kind of hurts their transition defense coming back. So, there's some issues there. And then I don't think this team is going to be very good on the defensive glass either. Reed Bailey, not a fantastic defensive rebounder, just not a ton of size and depth up front, right? You mentioned, we've got Reed Bailey at 6'11", we've got Sam Alexis at 6'8", and then aside from that, it's basically just DeVries and Nick Dorn both at 6'7". Like, there's just not a ton of size and athleticism up front to really take care of the defensive glass. So for me, it lies really in that front court and their ability to protect the rim and clean the glass on the defensive end.
Yeah, it's not pretty in the front court. I guess that's what I will say. I think I thought it was a pretty good roster construction outside of this one aspect. I thought it was just a bit odd that DeVries wasn't able to go out there and get any sort of like resemblance of a true rim anchor or a five-man there. It's just his defenses are, it's a lot of drop coverage and pick and roll, and that puts more pressure on your bigs to make decisions and, defend the rim at a high level. And, if you're going to trust Sam Alexis here, I'm a little bit worried. And I will say, I think Reed Bailey fits better as a defender at the 4. I think he's able to defend on the perimeter enough, and I think he's a good enough positional rebounder in that spot. I think it's weird because I think he's a better fit on the offensive end at the 5, but I think he's a better fit defensively at the 4, which makes it a really weird outlook for him. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they use Bailey throughout the season. And I don't think the point of attack defense is good enough to really mask the lack of rim protection, which, definitely leads to some issues when defending in the half court. So they're going to have to be an elite transition denial defense. Tate Connerway is going to have to, I wish they had 3 Tate Connerways. I think that would make it a little bit easier, but I just don't think they have anyone that resembles that. Like, a guy like Connor Enright off the bench, I think will get after you a little bit. He's a solid defensive playmaker, but it's not the same. And it's just looking at the rest of this roster, it's not great. I think one guy I do think is going to be really important is Trent Sisley, playing the 4. I actually think he's a pretty good lateral mover at that position. He's got some size there, some switchability. I think he's going to be important. I think he's a guy that could carve out a role ultimately, like if Reed Bailey plays the 5, I think Sicily's going to end up playing a decent amount of minutes at the 4 this year. But ultimately, yeah, there's concerns like the ones you mentioned: 2-point defense, defensive rebounding, and yeah, just I think the lack of point of attack defense, I think, is gonna it could change ultimately what DeVries is going to do on the defensive side. They're going to play a little bit more of a shell defensively, play in the gaps a little bit more, and like not completely just allow teams to bomb away from 3, but at least mask that lack of rim protection just by playing in the gaps a bit more. Ultimately, I just don't think the personnel is good enough to be a great defense.
Yeah, no, I agree. But looking at MVP and X Factor for Indiana, where'd you go here?
I went with Tucker DeVries as my MVP. I think he's going to do a ton for this offense as a creator and as an off-ball shooter. He's actually a pretty good defensive playmaker as well. He's not really a great on-ball defender, but when you look at him, he's always in the right positions off the ball, and he's always looking to make a play. So I do kind of like him as a two-way player, but I do think it's mostly for the offensive end is why I'm going to give him the MVP. My X factor, I went with Reed Bailey. For the reasons that I mentioned, I think, like I said, he fits better defensively at the 4 and offensively at the 5. Like if they can figure out how to utilize him the best over the course of 40 minutes, I think he could be a really impactful player here. But I think it's more like he's more swing piece than he is X factor. Like I think there's a lot of paths for this to go kind of poorly for him. It could end up being a really bad fit. But if DeVries can figure some things out in the front court and put him in the most optimal positions, I do think that this could be a really good get.
Yeah, I almost made him my X factor. I went with DeVries as my MVP as well for most of the reasons we've mentioned here so far. X factor, I actually went with a group here. I went with the perimeter defense of Indiana for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about, with the front court being really a weak point on the defensive end. And I made, instead of going with Reed Bailey, I kind of looked at it this way. Like we've seen at this point now, like what Reed Bailey pretty much is for 3 years at Davidson. I don't really see much changing. If anything, I kind of see things getting worse, now in the Big Ten. So I think it's that much more important now that the guard defense is really elite. And like you mentioned, maybe they play a bit more of a shell to kind of try and mask the interior defense and keep the ball from getting deeper into the paint to expose the rim protection. Obviously, then you're probably going to be forcing longer shots, which means now you have to rebound, which, as we talked about, is a bit of an issue. I think it's going to be really important for these guards to rebound down, right? So, going to be a really key point of emphasis, I would think, for Darian DeVries. So that's why I went with this guard group as a whole being the X factor.
That's fair, and I think they're capable of defensive rebounding. I think guys like Connerway and DeVries are capable of rebounding when it's more of an emphasis and when they really have to. Somebody's going to have to make up for the lack of physicality and size in the front court, and it's probably going to end up being that wing group, and that's another reason why I think Sicily is going to be important. I almost went with him as my X factor, but was just a little bit uncertain of what the role is going to look like early in the year.
Yeah. So I guess before we wrap things up here, ceiling and floor for this Indiana team, then a bold prediction.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be a very interesting offense, and if they can figure some things out, I think they can get themselves to the 6th in the Big Ten, and they can be a tournament team. I think they could be a 6 or 7 seed in the tournament, just because their shooting is going to be so good. And we've talked about the defense; they need to figure some things out to even reach that ceiling. But I guess that's why it's a ceiling at the end of the day. And I had their floor at around 12th or 13th. I think the defense could run into a lot of trouble, and it could just be a lacking unit from a power conference standpoint, honestly. And I mean, DeVries didn't have like the greatest front court at West Virginia last year, and he still found a way to get that defense to 7th in the country. But it's the personnel is obviously a little bit different, so I see more avenues for some disaster on this end. So I went with 12th or 13th, and then on the outside looking in at the tournament.
Yeah. I had a pretty wide range of outcomes as well. I said they could maybe get up as high as 5th in this league if they figure some things out defensively, if they're able to kind of mask the front court issues. I could see them as low as 12th if they are unable to do that. I think there's a wide range for this Indiana team, which leads me into my bold prediction. I said that Indiana is going to finish bottom 5 in the Power 5 in both block rate and defensive rebound rate. I think really just with this this front court group, I think it's a little bit more bold probably on the defensive rebound rate side. I think the block rate is probably within reach just with the group they have there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, definitely block rate is a little more likely to finish near the bottom. I think DeVries can find a way to get this team to be an okay defensive rebounding team. He could, like I mentioned, I think it turns into a little bit more of a shell and forcing some teams to beat you over the top. But for my bold prediction, like we've talked about this defense being kind of poor for a large portion of this episode, but this guy is not going to be a reason. I think Tatum Connerway wins Defensive Player of the Year in this conference. I mean, there's potential for him to average 3 steals a game. I think. I don't know if he's going to play over 30 minutes. Maybe average 2.9 steals per game last year at Troy, but I think he's the best defensive playmaker in the entire country, and I think he's going to show that. He's going to have a lot of responsibility, so I think he's going to try to be hunting more steals, and I think getting over that 3 steals per game mark is going to be a real driver in him winning this award.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well continue to ride the Tatum Connerway train, right? I mean, he's really, really good on-ball defender, so we'll see what happens there with him. It'd be cool if he could win it. But anyway, we'll wrap things up here with the Hoosiers. Thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.